Lieutenant Callie Reyes had seen many things during her tenure aboard the USS Venture, humanity's proud exploratory vessel pushing through the Orion Spur. But nothing could have prepared her for the small, trembling bundle of fur they found drifting in the wreckage of a derelict ship. "Captain, you might want to see this," she called out, cradling the tiny creature in her gloved hands. The kitten-like being was barely the size of a human infant, covered in soft, silver-tipped fur with faint bioluminescent patterns across its body. It had enormous eyes, pure black voids that reflected the dim emergency lighting of the wreckage. Captain Darius Voss approached cautiously, peering at the being with a mix of concern and curiosity. "Survivor." Reyes shook her head. "No signs of life anywhere else. Scans indicate the ship's been abandoned for months, maybe years. It was a miracle the creature was still alive. The environmental readings showed barely enough oxygen left for a single lungful. The life support systems had long since failed, leaving behind nothing but an eerie silence." Dr. Elias Kale, the ship's xenobiologist, scanned the tiny alien with his handheld device. "Its vitals are weak, but stable. No obvious injuries, though. I don't think it can see." Reyes frowned, watching as the kitten tilted its head, seemingly reacting to their voices, but failing to focus on anything. Its pupils didn't adjust to the light, and when she moved her hand in front of its face, there was no response. "Blind?" Voss asked, his tone laced with sympathy. Kale nodded. "Looks like it. Either congenital or a result of whatever happened here. Poor thing." Reyes pulled the kitten closer to her chest, feeling the faint vibrations of its breathing. "We can't leave here." Captain Voss let out a long breath before giving a firm nod. "All right, bring it aboard, but keep it under quarantine. I don't want any surprises." They returned to the Venture, Reyes holding the tiny alien close even as it trembled. She whispered reassurances, feeling an odd sense of protectiveness growing within her. The ship's quarantine bay was sterile and quiet, filled with the soft hum of medical equipment. Reyes sat beside the examination table, watching as Kale conducted more thorough scans. The kitten remained eerily still, barely moving except for the slow rise and fall of its chest. "I don't see any parasites or infections," Kale muttered. "Nutrient levels are dangerously low, though. It needs food." Reyes gently stroked the kitten's fur, her fingers tingling from the strange bioluminescent energy it emitted. "But how do we even know what it eats?" Kale sighed. "We don't. We'll have to try a few different things." As the hours passed, they offered various protein gels, liquid nutrients, even simulated meat. But the kitten refused them all. Then, as Reyes sat back in frustration, it made a tiny, chirping sound and reached toward her with a trembling paw. She blinked. "It wants me." Captain Voss, who had been observing from the doorway, raised an eyebrow. "Reyes, I think you just got adopted." The kitten clambered weakly onto her lap, curling into a tiny ball. Its breathing slowed, becoming steadier. "Looks like you're its best bet for survival," Kale noted. Reyes sighed, running a hand through her short, black hair. "Guess I better not screw this up." She had no idea just how much their lives were about to change. For the first few days aboard the Venture, the alien kitten, nicknamed Echo by Reyes, remained weak but responsive. It refused most food, relying on minimal sips of water. However, it clung to Reyes like a lifeline, never straying far from her side. It was as if she had become its anchor in an unfamiliar universe. But something felt off. Reyes first noticed it when she was working a late shift in the engineering bay. She had set Echo in a small makeshift bed near her workstation, wrapped in a thermal blanket. The kitten's eyes remained empty voids, unresponsive as usual. Yet, when she dropped a wrench, Echo flinched before the sound even reached its ears. At first, she dismissed it as coincidence, maybe heightened hearing, or some extrasensory perception. But as the days passed, more anomalies emerged. One morning, Reyes woke to find Echo sitting upright on her desk, staring directly at her. Not near her, not past her. At her. She waved a hand in front of its face. No reaction. She moved her head slightly. Echo's gaze followed. "You can see, can't you?" she whispered. The kitten let out a soft trill, blinking slowly. It was unsettling. Echo showed all the signs of blindness, yet reacted to things in ways that shouldn't be possible. Reyes wasn't one for paranoia, but she knew when something was beyond explanation. She brought her concerns to Dr. Kale. The xenobiologist ran another series of tests, scanning Echo's neural pathways. His frown deepened. "This doesn't make sense. The ocular structure doesn't process light in any way we understand. There's no optic nerve, no retina function. If it were any other species, I'd say it was 100% blind, but it's not," Reyes said firmly. Kale exhaled. "No, it's not." They weren't the only ones noticing. Lieutenant Owen Thorne, a security officer with a sharp eye for oddities, had been observing Echo during his off-duty hours. "That thing gives me the creeps," he admitted, arms crossed as he watched the kitten prowl around Reyes' workstation. "It moves like it knows exactly where everything is." Reyes frowned. "You think it's dangerous?" Thorne hesitated. "No, just not normal." Reyes looked down at Echo, who was now perched on her lap, kneading the fabric of her jumpsuit with its tiny paws. It let out a soft purr, one that vibrated deeper than any feline she had ever heard. Dr. Kale adjusted his glasses. "I have a theory." They all turned to him. "It's not seeing in the traditional sense," Kale said. "It's perceiving something else. Maybe electromagnetic fields, maybe heat signatures, or something entirely different. It interacts with its environment, based on stimuli we don't understand. So, some kind of sixth sense?" Thorne asked. Kale nodded. "Potentially." Reyes leaned back, stroking Echo's fur absent-mindedly. "That still doesn't explain why it faked being blind." A long silence stretched between them. Then, Thorne muttered, "Maybe it wasn't faking. Maybe it was hiding." The words sent a chill down Reyes' spine. From what? Things took a sharp turn when Echo stopped eating entirely. Reyes spent hours trying different methods to feed it, but nothing worked. The once weak creature had grown stronger, its fur more vibrant, its movements more fluid. Yet, it hadn't consumed a single calorie in days. Kale ran more tests, scanning for signs of malnutrition. But the results were baffling. "It's thriving," he admitted, staring at the data in disbelief. "Its metabolic rate is normal. No energy deficiency. In fact, it's healthier now than when we found it." Reyes exhaled sharply. "That's not possible. Nothing survives without fuel." Kale hesitated before responding. "Unless it's drawing energy from somewhere else." A silence settled over them. Thorne, ever the skeptic, scoffed. "Like what? Photosynthesis? Radiation?" Kale didn't answer immediately. He tapped at his console, flipping through spectral analysis results. Then his expression darkened. "It's feeding," he murmured. Reyes felt her stomach drop. "On what?" Kale turned the screen toward them. It displayed faint, fluctuating energy patterns around Echo, patterns that correlated disturbingly with the neural activity of the crew. "It's drawing energy from us," he said grimly. Reyes recoiled, glancing down at the kitten nestled in her lap. Echo looked up at her, its two dark eyes reflecting her face. It chirped softly, tilting its head. Thorne's hand went to his sidearm. "That's it. We need to contain this thing." Reyes instinctively shielded Echo. "Wait." Before anyone could react, the ship's emergency klaxons blared. The lights flickered. The deck shuddered beneath their feet. Then came the voice of Ensign Marquez over the comms. "Captain, we've got unidentified vessels inbound, fast." Reyes swore under her breath. Kale paled. "They're coming for it, aren't they?" Echo let out a low, vibrating trill, one that sounded eerily like a warning. Reyes gritted her teeth. Whatever Echo truly was, it had just put them all in danger. The klaxons continued their wailing shriek, and the Venture lurched violently as proximity alarms blared. The ship's main display flickered to life, revealing the incoming vessels, for sleek, black craft moving in tight formation. No insignia, no transponder codes. Pirates. No. Reyes had seen a lot in her years, but these ships didn't belong to any known faction. These were hunters, and they were hunting Echo. Incoming hail! Marquez shouted from the bridge. On screen, Reyes snapped. The display flickered again, revealing a figure cloaked in shifting darkness. Their face was hidden, but their voice was smooth, almost amused. Vessel Venture, you are harboring stolen property. Surrender the creature, and we will allow you to leave unscathed. Reyes felt Echo tense in her arms, its tiny claws digging into her jumpsuit. The kitten's body vibrated with a low hum, not a purr, but something deeper, something almost mechanical. Thorn growled from behind her. And if we don't? The figure tilted their head. Then we take it, along with your lives. Reyes clenched her jaw. Cut the comms. The screen went dark. We can't outrun them, Marquez said, fingers flying over the controls. They're too fast. We don't need to outrun them, Reyes said. We just need to outfight them. She turned to Kale, who was staring at Echo with growing alarm. Doc, tell me the truth. What the hell is this thing? Kale swallowed. I don't know. But whatever it is, it's not just some lost animal. Reyes met Echo's too dark gaze. The creature wasn't trembling in fear. It was waiting. Then the first blast hit. The Venture rolled under the force of the impact, its shields barely holding. The attackers were testing them, playing with their food. Shields at 60%. Marquez yelled. Reyes gritted her teeth. Return fire. Thorn unleashed a barrage of plasma rounds, but the enemy ships were fast, too fast. They danced through the void, dodging effortlessly. We're sitting ducks, Thorn snapped. They're toying with us. And then, in the chaos, Echo moved. The kitten leapt from Reyes' arms, landing on the control panel. Its body pulsed with a strange energy, and suddenly, the ship's lights flickered. The screens distorted. The very air felt charged. And the Venture moved. Not piloted. Not thrusters. It shifted. One moment they were locked in battle. The next, they were behind the enemy ships. What the? Marquez yelped. Thorn's hands were frozen over the weapon's controls, eyes wide. Reyes barely had time to process before Echo turned to face the screen. Its dark, void-like eyes changed. For the first time, they lit up, and the enemy ships, so sleek, so perfect, suddenly stopped. Dead in space. Motionless. Like prey caught in a predator's gaze. Reyes sucked in a breath. It's controlling them. The enemy ships began to crack. Their flawless exteriors warped and twisted, as if unseen hands were crushing them. No weapons fired. No explosions. Just pressure. Metal shrieked. And then silence. For ships. Gone. Crushed into nothingness. No wreckage. No bodies. Just erased. Reyes turned, chest tight, hands clenched. Echo looked up at her, eyes still glowing, a soft trill escaping its throat. And in that moment, Reyes knew. Echo had never been blind. It had been waiting to see. The bridge of the Venture was silent, save for the soft, electric hum emanating from Echo. The kitten sat on the console, its tiny body casting an impossibly large shadow under the dim emergency lights. Its eyes, now glowing, shifting with an unnatural energy, stared into nothingness. Reyes wasn't sure if it was breathing. Thorn broke the silence first. What the hell just happened? His voice was raw, disbelieving. Marquez's hands hovered over his console, as if afraid to touch anything. The enemy ships, they didn't explode. They didn't jump away, Kale whispered. They were erased. Like they were never here. Reyes forced herself to take a steadying breath, her eyes fixed on Echo. You're not just a lost kitten, are you? She murmured. Echo blinked, and for the first time, Reyes felt something looking back. Not just the small, timid creature they had rescued. Something ancient. Something powerful. And then the ship shuddered. Something else was coming. The main screen flickered again, But this time, there was no call. No ominous figure demanding their surrender. Instead, space itself seemed to warp and twist as a rift tore open before them. A vessel emerged, if it could even be called that. It was colossal, not built, but grown, like living bone and flowing liquid fused together. Jagged, pulsing veins ran along its surface, and the moment it appeared, every sensor on the Venture went haywire. "That's not a ship," Marquez breathed. "That's a goddamn nightmare," Thorne finished. The air grew thick, oppressive, like gravity had turned against them. A low-frequency hum filled the ship, vibrating deep in their bones. Reyes fought the rising nausea. Then, a voice, whispering in their minds. "You have what belongs to us." Reyes gritted her teeth, her hands gripping the edge of the console. "No," she said, more to herself than the presence invading her thoughts. The voice, no, voices, grew sharper. "Return the child, and you may yet survive." Reyes turned to Echo, whose fur bristled, the glow in its eyes intensifying. This thing wanted Echo. Echo, who had saved them. Echo, who was now staring back at the entity in open defiance. "Like hell we will," Reyes spat. The ship lurched. No weapons fired. No explosion rocked them. Instead, the walls bled. Dark veins spread through the metal like ink in water. The Venture groaned, its systems dimming. The monstrous vessel outside wasn't attacking them conventionally. It was infecting them. Reyes drew her sidearm on instinct, knowing it was useless. Thorne. Options. Thorne's face was pale, his fingers gripping the weapon console. "I don't. There's nothing." The lights flickered. The whispering grew louder. And then, Echo leapt from the console. The tiny creature moved like a bolt of living electricity, landing between Reyes and the infected walls. Its glow intensified, shifting from eerie blue to something deeper, richer, an impossible color, as if Reyes' eyes couldn't quite comprehend it. The ship trembled, and for the first time, the other presence hesitated. No, the word wasn't spoken. It was felt. And then Echo roared. Not a kitten's mew. Not an animal's cry. Something larger. Something old. The sound rippled through the ship, through the void, through the monstrous entity looming outside. The veins that had begun to spread recoiled, burning away under the sheer force of the sound. The whispering turned to screams. The colossal vessel shuddered. Echo turned its glowing gaze upon the entity, and for the first time, the predator became prey. Reyes watched in awe as the massive structure withered. The pulsing veins dried, the jagged bones cracked, the flowing liquid turned to dust. The monster had come for its lost child. But Echo was no child. It was something more, something the hunters had feared, and something even they could not control. The entity let out a final, desperate shriek as it began to collapse in on itself, folding like a dying star, pulled into the nothingness from which it had emerged. And then, silence. The Venture was whole again. The air was light. The whispering was gone. Echo turned back to Reyes. Its glow faded. Its eyes darkened. And then, as if nothing had happened, the tiny creature trotted back to her feet, brushing against her leg with a soft, pleased trill. Reyes exhaled, chest tight. She knelt, scooping Echo into her arms. "Yeah," she murmured, stroking the kitten's fur. "I don't think you were ever blind at all." Echo purred, but Reyes couldn't shake the thought creeping in the back of her mind. If Echo had hidden its sight, what else was it still hiding? The bridge remained eerily silent, the hum of the Venture systems returning to normal. Emergency lights flickered back to life, the lingering sensation of the alien presence dissipating like smoke on the wind. Reyes let out a slow breath, her pulse still hammering in her ears. Thorne wiped his face, his hands shaking slightly. That was not normal. Marquez laughed, a nervous, half-mad chuckle. "No shit, man." Kale's fingers moved across his console, scanning for any residual effects from the encounter. "Systems are stabilizing. No structural damage, No organic residue. It's like he trailed off, brow furrowing, like it was never here, but had been. Reyes looked down at the small creature in her arms, its fur soft against her fingertips. Echo gazed up at her, no longer glowing, no longer bristling with unnatural power. Just a tiny, blind alien kitten, except now, Reyes knew better. Echo, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. The kitten blinked, tilting its head, and then something flickered behind those deep, dark eyes, a spark of knowing. Reyes knew she should feel terrified, but she didn't. Echo had saved them. She ran, a hand down its back, feeling its small frame relax against her chest. Whatever you are, I think you just saved all of us. Echo let out a pleased little chirp, rubbing its head against her collarbone. Kale exhaled, leaning back in his chair. We need to report this. The council needs to know what we just encountered. Yeah, Reyes said, raising a brow. And tell them what, exactly? That we were attacked by something that shouldn't exist. That a blind kitten destroyed an eldritch horror by staring at it. Thorne scoffed. Yeah, let's see how well that goes over. Reyes sighed. No reports. Not yet. We need more information before we go screaming to the higher-ups about something we barely understand. Kale frowned, but didn't argue. Marquez leaned forward, resting his elbows on his console. So what now? We just keep Echo on board, like nothing happened. Reyes looked at the small creature nestled against her chest. The answer was obvious. Yeah, she said. That's exactly what we do. The Venture floated peacefully through the void, the trauma of their encounter now a distant but unforgettable memory. The crew had settled back into their routine, though it was hard to call anything normal after what they'd witnessed. Reyes sat in the common area, Echo curled up in her lap, fast asleep. Kale approached, datapad in hand. I ran more scans on Echo. There's something strange about its biology. Reyes smirked. Shocking revelation. Kale ignored her sarcasm. I mean it, Reyes. This thing isn't natural. Not in the way we understand. Its genetic structure, if you can even call it that, keeps shifting, rewriting itself. I've never seen anything like it. Reyes stroked Echo's fur absently. What are you saying? That it's dangerous? Kale hesitated. I don't know. Maybe. But it doesn't act like a threat. It's protective, if anything. Reyes nodded, her gaze softening. It is. Kale sighed. Look, I know you've grown attached, but nothing. She cut him off. Echo stays. Kale studied her for a long moment before shaking his head with a chuckle. You're impossible, Reyes. She grinned. That's why you like me. Kale rolled his eyes, but said nothing as he walked away. Reyes looked down at Echo, her fingers tracing small circles along its back. Something had changed since the encounter. The Venture systems were sharper, more efficient. The ship responded faster. And sometimes, when Reyes was alone, she swore she could feel something watching over them. Not in a sinister way, but in the way a guardian might watch over something it cared for. She exhaled, leaning back in her chair. Whatever Echo was, however powerful it might be, one thing was clear. It had chosen them. And somehow, Reyes knew it wouldn't let anything happen to them. Not now. Not ever. The Venture drifted through the endless sea of stars, a silent witness to the unknown forces lurking within the void. The scars of their encounter with the anomaly had faded, but its impact lingered, etched into the ship's memory, into the minds of the crew, and most of all, into Reyes herself. In the weeks since that day, strange things had begun to happen. The ship felt different. Not broken, not malfunctioning. If anything, it was more responsive than ever. The engines hummed at frequencies they never had before, subtly optimizing fuel consumption. The life support systems ran smoother, adjusting conditions to crew preferences without manual input. Doors opened just before someone reached them. Sensors detected anomalies before they happened. And at the center of it all was Echo. The small, blind alien kitten had become something of a legend among the crew. It wandered the ship freely, curling up in laps when people were stressed, chirping at malfunctioning systems just before they mysteriously fixed themselves. The engineers had stopped questioning it. Even Kale, ever the skeptic, had resigned himself to the reality that Echo wasn't just a pet. It was something more. You're telling me the ship is alive now? Thorne leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest. The dim lights of the briefing room cast deep shadows on his face. Kale sighed, rubbing his temples. Not alive, but enhanced. There's a pattern to the system optimizations. Something intelligent behind it. Marquez drummed his fingers on the table. So you're saying Echo is doing this? That it's fixing the ship? Kale hesitated. I don't know if fixing is the right word. More like evolving it. Reyes leaned forward, her expression unreadable. And what if it is? The room fell silent. Marquez exhaled through his nose. Look, I like the little guy, but this is some freaky stuff. What if it starts changing things we don't want it to? It hasn't yet, Reyes pointed out. If Echo meant us harm, we'd know by now. Kale frowned. Or maybe we wouldn't. A weight settled over the table. The thought was unsettling. What if Echo wasn't just helping? What if it was testing them? Preparing them for something bigger? Reyes looked down at the small creature curled up in her lap. Echo's tiny chest rose and fell in slow, rhythmic breaths. It was impossible to believe something so small, so fragile-looking, could be responsible for what was happening. And yet, she felt it. A presence. A silent awareness, woven into the very fabric of the ship. Watching. Waiting. Guiding. The Venture's next assignment came faster than expected. The Galactic Council had picked up an unknown signal in the outer reaches of explored space, a sector long thought to be empty. No planets, no stations, no known anomalies. But something was there. Command wants us to investigate, Reyes announced as the crew gathered in the bridge. Long-range scans picked up something. It's broadcasting in a frequency no one's seen before. Kale's expression darkened. Like the thing we encountered before. Reyes shook her head. No, this is different. Less hostile. More like a beacon. A distress signal. Marquez asked. Maybe, Reyes admitted. Or a trap. Thorne cracked his knuckles. Guess we'll find out the fun way. Reyes turned to Kale. How does Echo react to it? Kale hesitated before answering. He's been restless. Pacing. Chirping at the comm systems. I think. He swallowed. I think he wants us to go. Reyes met his gaze. Then we go. No one argued. Because they all knew deep down that whatever Echo was leading them toward, it was part of something far bigger than any of them. The Venture accelerated into uncharted space, the hum of its engines steady beneath their feet. As they approached the source of the signal, the air aboard the ship seemed to shift, an unspoken tension curling around them like unseen tendrils. Echo sat at the center of the bridge, tail flicking, ears perked, his blind eyes staring straight ahead. The moment they reached the coordinates, the view screen flickered, then filled with an image none of them had expected. A massive structure, ancient and weathered, floated in the void. Its dark, metallic surface bore markings eerily similar to the ones they had seen on the anomaly weeks before. A civilization long lost, a warning left behind, or an invitation. Reyes swallowed hard. Well, shit. Kale's hands hovered over the console. It's waiting for us. Marquez muttered a curse under his breath. This is a terrible idea. Reyes looked down at Echo. The small creature blinked once, then twice, then let out a soft, unmistakable sound. A purr. Reyes exhaled, rolling her shoulders. Prepare a landing team. She turned toward the screen, staring into the dark abyss of history unfolding before them. Whatever lay ahead, there was no turning back now. The ship moved forward. Echo watched. And far, far in the distance, something watched back.